We begin our discussion of the mobile web app version of the favorite Twitter searches app by taking a look at the HTML document that defines the structure of the web page. Now, because we're assuming that you're already familiar with basic HTML markup, we're going to be focusing instead on some of the items within the head section of the document that have to do specifically with mobile web app development and just the basic structure of the body of the document. Now, in the head section, we do start with a title element, and on a typical mobile web browser, you might see the title at the very top of the web page, and it will often only be on the screen until you start scrolling through the web page. Sometimes it won't appear on the screen at all, or if you're on a tablet-based device, the title might show up as one of the tabs within your web browser if it supports tabbed navigation. But also, the title is important for people who bookmark your web-based mobile app and potentially put a shortcut to your web-based mobile app on their home screens. And the reason for that is the title gets used as the shortcut name by default. Now, the next thing we have are four different link elements here, the first two of which are linking in CSS style sheets. Now, the first one is kind of important. When you're trying to design a mobile app that has the exact same look and feel across a wide variety of browsers, it's important to do what's known as a CSS reset first. It turns out that every different browser has its own kind of default style sheet that says what the default font is for text elements on the screen and what the default spacing is and sizing is for the different HTML elements. And that can lead to strange issues when you try to display that web page across multiple different devices and browsers. So to help eliminate some of those problems, if you perform a so-called CSS reset, which basically strips out all of those default styling options, that allows you to then specify the full styling of every element that is displayed on the screen. Now, for our purposes here, you see that we're linking to a file named css_reset.css. I'm going to pull that up on the screen here. We downloaded this from the site that you see in the first line of the document here. This is a public domain CSS reset that's pretty popular, and basically the idea is for all the different elements that you see in this list here, we want to set the margin to 0 and the padding to 0, which removes all the spacing around the element and inside the element, make sure there's no border on the element, set the font size to a default of 100%, and set the font to inherit for all these elements, so it's going to inherit the default font for the elements, and then also the vertical alignment of the elements is on the baseline of the font. Now, all of this is just a free download from meyerweb.com, the full URL that you see at the top of the screen here, and by importing that via a link element into our web page first, what we're doing is ensuring that all of the default CSS styling for the page is removed before our CSS styles in the file style.css, which we'll look at in the next video, get applied to the web page. Now, the next two link elements are important for mobile devices in particular. When you bookmark a web page on a mobile device, sometimes the way you bookmark it is by putting a home screen shortcut. And like any other app on your home screen, you want shortcuts to mobile apps to be displayed with a nice mobile icon. Now, the folks over at Apple originated the link elements that you see here at lines 10 and 11 for iPhone and other iOS types of devices. The Apple Touch icon and Apple Touch icon precomposed link elements represent icons that can be used on the home screen of a mobile device. And most mobile web browsers nowadays across all the different mobile platforms now support these link elements that Apple made popular. Now, the difference between the two is really only exposed on Apple devices, on iOS devices. Those of you who have ever worked with an Apple device may be familiar with the fact that the home screen icons look like they have a shiny look to them. Whatever icon you specify using the link element shown here at line 10 is going to have the shiny look and feel applied to it by Apple's operating system. All of the other mobile platforms will simply use this icon as is, as it was originally designed in creating a shortcut on the home screen. For those of you who might be designing apps that will also be used on Apple devices, if you want complete control over what your app's icon looks like, then you can use the Apple Touch icon pre-composed link element. And we supplied both of these here, even though this is being done in an Android book, because one of the key goals when you define a mobile web app is that you really want it to run on all sorts of mobile devices, not just Android devices or not just Apple devices, etc. Now at line 12 we have the script element that links in our favorite Twitter searches.js JavaScript file, and we'll look at that in a subsequent video. That's where we define all the logic of the web page. And then finally we have a very important meta element which helps us with scaling up the contents of our page to fit the mobile device viewable area, if you will. Now by default a web page is much wider typically than the width of a mobile device screen, especially when you're talking about the context of a mobile phone type of device. By configuring a meta element with the name viewport, you can make your web apps look better on small screens like those of mobile phones. So the way you do that is by, in this case, the way we're doing it in this case is by setting the content so the user cannot scale it. So the user can't zoom in and out, which is something that you often need to do in web pages that are not designed for mobile browser viewing. And then we're also setting another attribute for the content, which is that the width is going to be equal to the device width. And what this does is it scales the viewport so that the maximum width of the viewport is the device width. That's number one. And number two, when we then use CSS and say that a particular element should match the device width, it will now automatically scale to the width of the device, making that element a lot more readable and usable on a mobile device screen. Now, within the body of our element, we have the structure of the document, and I'm also going to flip back and forth with this screen capture that has callouts on it, showing you all the different elements that are on the screen. So going back to the body here, we start with an H1 containing the text favorite Twitter searches. That is what's showing up at the top of our web page. Next, we have a paragraph element which is not in that screen capture that I'm flipping back and forth with here. This is a paragraph that's only displayed the first time the user visits the page. As we mentioned in the test drive, we're going to be taking advantage of HTML5 web storage capabilities, and one of those capabilities is a so-called session storage capability, which is useful during the current browsing session. And basically the first time we visit the page during the current browsing session, we'll display the welcome message, and then if we continue on after that, the welcome message will no longer get displayed. So if you look over here on my screen capture where I have all the callouts, that paragraph element gets displayed underneath the H1 with favorite Twitter searches in it only the first time the user visits the page. Next, we have a form that consists of a bunch of different paragraphs. The first paragraph contains a hyperlink that links the user to the Twitter documentation where they can learn more about the different operators that can be used in a Twitter search query. This can be useful in narrowing down the search results. And that is the hyperlink that says list of Twitter search operators. Next, we have two paragraphs containing input elements of type text, and the first one is where the user enters the query string, and the second one is the short tag name string that will be displayed in the previously tagged searches at the bottom of the web page. And then finally, we have a paragraph containing two input elements of type button, one for saving the search that's being entered, and one for clearing all of the previously saved searches as well. And of course, we'll provide functionality for these buttons to say what happens when the user clicks them. Now, the next piece on the page is an H1 that says previously tagged searches. That's what you see separating out the top part of the page from the bottom. And then finally, we have a div called searches where we're going to display all of the saved searches that are stored in the local storage for this app. And as you can see here in our text on the left side of the screen, what's actually being displayed in that div is an unordered list to which we're applying CSS styles that cause us to show you the text of the tag for a query as a hyperlink, and then also a couple of icons, one for editing the current search and one for deleting the current search. Remember from the test drive that if you click the edit icon, these fields up top will be populated with the current search query and tag of the search. If you change the search query and hit save search, it will replace the previous query with the new one. If you change the name of the tag, it will actually add a new key value pair to the local storage for the app, and that's a good way to create a new search that's based on a previous search that you had entered in the app. So that's the basics of the HTML page. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at the CSS for this web page, and one of the key things that you have to keep in mind when looking at the CSS are the different IDs that we've given for various elements here, and sometimes the types of the elements themselves, so that we can figure out how the CSS is selecting elements and applying formatting to them.